Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Ask the ARC. My name is Carly Schertino-Poulter, and I'm the director of the ARC Advocacy Network. And I am very excited to be joined today by Kim Dodson, the CEO of the ARC of Indiana. Kim has been with the ARC for more than 20 years and has always led our public policy initiatives. And tonight she's joining us to talk about what all is going on at the Indiana General Assembly now that a new session has begun, what we can expect, and to be able to answer questions as people have them. So one of the things I'm going to ask is that if you have questions, go ahead and put those questions in the Q&A. The chat is disabled for the moment. And so if you can put your questions in the Q&A, we will answer those as people have them. And so now I'd like to turn it over to Kim Dodson.
Great. Thanks, Carly. And hi, everybody. Thanks for joining in tonight. You will probably learn pretty soon. I'm pretty passionate about public policy. It's pretty much a true passion for me. Since it's what I've done for my 32 plus career or 32 plus year career. I've been with the ARC of Indiana for about 26 years. I came in as their government affairs director, but I've been very fortunate just in my career. In college, I worked for a U.S. congressman. Upon leaving college, I worked for the Indiana House of Representatives. I've worked for a law firm as a contract lobbyist. And so I really have had the opportunity to see public policy come together from a few different angles. And I think that has really allowed me the opportunity to see not only how policy is made, but also effective ways to work with not only elected officials in our legislature and our state government, but also policymakers as a whole. And so I hope that I'm able to answer some questions for all of you tonight. And I really hope that I convince you all to get involved in the legislative process. I'm going to just kind of share with you kind of what we can expect this legislative session. And then I hope to also get into some of the bills that the ARC of Indiana is going to be working on this session, and then certainly want to hear from all of you about what questions you have and what thoughts you may have about things going forward. So we'll first just kind of start off with some details. So we have a legislative session that just started yesterday. So yesterday was the first day of the legislative session. This is what we call a long session. It's a long session because the legislature is in for about 4 months. So by statute, the legislature has to end by January or by April 29th. This is also the year, as during a long session, is when the state legislators write and pass our state budget. So Indiana has a 2-year state budget. So our legislators come together every 2 years to write Indiana's budget. So that is priority number one for this legislature, but there's certainly always other priorities that come along. In addition to that, this current legislature wants to end a little bit early. So, during the first couple of days of the legislative session, policy leaders kind of start talking about kind of the pace of the legislative session and what we can expect. So they have already put out a calendar that they are wanting and anticipating ending session on April 24th. So that is 5 days earlier than what they have to by statute. They are still going to continue the practice of not being in session on Fridays and spending the weekends at home. In addition, our House of Representatives has elected this year to change up their schedule a little bit. So right now, the current practice or the past practice has really been the legislature comes in Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Return home on Fridays for a long weekend, meet with constituents, have some town hall meetings, those kind of stuff. Wednesdays have always been kind of set aside as a committee day. So both for the House and Senate, neither of them came into session on Wednesdays, but they would spend that day in a lot of different committees. For the House, next week specifically, they are only in session on Monday. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of next week, they are going to be meeting in committees. They are out of session. The state is closed to recognize the holiday of Martin Luther King on Monday, the 20th. And so that is kind of just setting the pace for January for the legislative session. the legislature, the House is saying, this gives more time for bills to be heard in committee. There's generally about 3,000 bills that get, introduced during a long session. So it'll give time for those bills to be introduced. It'll give time for committee chairmen to read those bills, decide what bills they're going to hear, and start setting their calendars to hear those bills. But it will also absolutely impact how accessible our legislators are as well. So if they're not in session, if they're not on a committee that's meeting that day, they may not be driving back up to the state house, which means they're going to be in their local district and perhaps available for meetings. So we want to take advantage as much of those as possible. The one other thing that the legislature has decided to do this year is that last week in February, both the House and Senate are going to be out for that entire week. We call that week crossover. So that is when House bills move to the Senate, Senate bills move to the House. So that crossover week, the legislature is going to take that whole week off, go home to their district, take a small vacation, spend time with their families, whatever it is that they want to do. And then they're going to return that next week again with the opportunities of moving into that committee process a little bit faster because they'll be able to read the bills that crossed over from the other house, assign them to committees, and get that ball rolling just a little bit faster. So again, it's a little bit of a different pace this year. And then just to throw it all in, we also have a new administration, right? So we just elected a new governor in November. This brings with it a whole new administration. So we have all new agency heads throughout our state, including the Family and Social Services Administration. So we're going to be getting to know a new administration. A new administration is getting to know our legislature. They're putting forward their budget priorities, their legislative priorities. And so it's really interesting. Governor-elect Braun gets sworn in on Monday. So in the middle of the day. So he is already coming in, a week after the legislative session. Certainly he has been working over the summer and since his election in November, talking about his priorities, working with legislators to make sure that they understand his thoughts on the 2-year budget. But really Monday is when him and his team will really start playing an extremely important role with our legislators. So it's just an interesting time in Indiana. Later on, we'll talk a little bit about what's happening on at the federal government later as well, because that's a whole other issue. But it's just a really interesting time here in Indiana with the new legislators coming in, our new administration, and how they're all going to end up working together. I also want to make note that when the legislature was elected in November, we do have 12 new legislators. So this is what we call freshman legislators. So these are people who were just elected in November. Right now, this is their first legislative session. I find that exciting. I think that's 12 new people that we can educate on our issues. These are 12 people who are usually eager to get engaged on something. They don't necessarily come to the legislature with, a real strong idea of, I want to tackle this issue. Most of them are wanting to build relationships, make new friends, and get involved in an issue. I honestly think that our issue is the easiest one for people to get behind because they all have people in their district, likely people that they know who have an intellectual and developmental disability. There's a lot of issues that impact people with disabilities. We can certainly find one that people can rally behind, and hopefully they can decide to be a champion and support our issues through this process. So we'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes about how to make those relationships get started and how to help educate them. But again, it's a really unique time for us to really have an impact on these 12 new legislators. I really want to make sure you all know that, as you decide to get involved in the legislative process, you're not in it alone. Please know that the ARC of Indiana is always here to answer questions, to help you, write a letter to a legislator, to visit with you. If you're coming to the State House and want to meet with a legislator, you don't want to do it by yourself, we are happy to not only help facilitate those meetings, but to sit right there with you as you're having your conversations and be support for you. So we don't want this to be a scary process. There's no reason for it to be a scary process. We really want to, help you make those relationships happen. Every week during the legislative session, the Arc of Indiana, we put out a legislative memo. So those come out on Friday. Tomorrow will be our first one. What we try to do in our memos is talk about what happened that week during the legislative session. We'll preview what we know is happening that next week. And then we'll talk about any of the bills that we are, working on, some highlights. So we will talk about, where an important bill is in the process and what needs to happen. So for example, we will say at some point, House Bill 1001, that will be the budget bill, is being heard in the Ways and Means Committee. Now is the time to contact your legislator and talk about how important Medicaid waiver services are to you, how important vocational rehabilitation services are to you. If you use, SNAP benefits, whatever the issue, we will tell you when it's time to start contacting your legislators to educate them about what issues are important to you. Making sure that they know that you want them to support certain bills, that you have concerns about certain bills. We'll talk you through kind of how to do that the most effective way. I think the two most important things I want to make sure you all hear is you really need to have a basic understanding of how a bill becomes a law. And that doesn't mean you have to get into the nitty-gritty. You just have to know that there is a process, right? When a House bill is introduced, it has to move through the House. Once it passes, it moves to the Senate. If a Senate bill is introduced, it has to move through the Senate. Once it passed, it moves to the House. I will tell you kind of all of the other details in our legislative memo, kind of where it is, but just make sure that, again, you're paying attention to those legislative memos because it has to be timely. We want to make sure that you're calling your legislator and asking them to support or not support a bill at the right time. So when it's in committee, when it's on the floor, we don't want you reaching out after a vote has already happened. Excuse me. So we make sure that you're paying attention to those memos so you at least know where bills are in the process. And again, have a basic understanding of the flow of the process. We do have some good examples of how a bill becomes a law on the Arc of Indiana website, and I encourage you all to go there. The second thing you guys really need to know, and I know this is hard to hear, but you really need to know how to express your story in a very brief and succinct way. So I know, and I really do know that all of your stories are really important. I also know in many ways that they're very complex. And so what you really need to do is find a way to share your story in about 10 sentences. And again, I know that that's hard, but you need to think about it as you need to give legislators an understanding of your issue and then make them ask the questions that invite them to learn more. You can't go so in the weeds about how a program isn't or isn't working in an email or something where they're going to get so lost in the details that they forget the point of your communication. So really make sure that you are able to have, a lot of us call it that elevator speech, right? Put together your elevator speech of who you are and why an issue is important to you. And then use that as an opportunity to invite them in to ask more questions, to invite them in to be educated more. We need to keep in mind that our legislators are part-time. So that means that they are not expert in everything. And most of the time, you are the experts because you live your lives each and every day. You understand what works and what doesn't work well. You need to help educate them on that. But again, you need to start building that relationship very slow. Right now is a great time to send that letter of introduction to your personal legislators. If you don't know who your legislators are, again, you can go to the Arc of Indiana's website, click on our public policy link. You'll be able to put in your address and you will find out who both your House of Representative and who your state senator is. Then you'll also get their email addresses. Send them just a quick email to just say, "Hi, I'm Kim Dodson. I live in your district. I have a daughter with an intellectual and developmental disability. We utilize Medicaid waiver services. I know that Medicaid is going to be an important topic this year. Please know that I am here as a resource. If you don't understand some of the changes that are being proposed, please reach out to me and I can tell you how that might impact my family." That's all it has to say. Again, you want to put yourself out there as a resource and invite them in to start building that relationship. That doesn't mean that you're a one and done. Start now, do a letter of introduction. Next week, send another letter to say, "Hey, I know the Medicaid conversation is going to be, talked about very, very soon in the budget bill. Let me again share with you how my daughter utilizes Medicaid waiver services and what that does for our family." So again, each time you contact them, you can get a little bit deeper into your story without that story being so overwhelming from the forefront. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. And again, I encourage you to start working on those letters of introduction. A lot of times we get some questions here at the ARC of, "Can't you just write the letter and let me sign my name?" And no, I can't do that. One thing that we have learned, and again, I learned this very well as a staffer of both a congressman and of a state legislator, form letters aren't impactful. When we get the same letter that is just signed by different people, we know that there is a entity out there putting together that letter, getting a bunch of signatures and sending it in. Uh, we want to make sure that, people tell their own story. We use our unique language to not only share our story, but again, to build that relationship, because that's what builds trust. And again, your story is important. Your issues are important to legislators. It needs to be said in your own words. And again, I will give you talking points. I will give you, you need to clearly say, "Please support House Bill number, whatever it is." State your why, state again how important it is to you. I will give you those talking points, but I won't write it for you. That seems to be said for petitions. There's always a lot of petitions that get signed. Sometimes petitions work, sometimes they don't. I can tell you a couple hundred names on a petition is meaningless. You have to get thousands and thousands of names on a petition for it to really start gaining interest. And again, I know that can be hard to hear because we see it all the time, right? We all get letters or requests for us to sign on to petitions. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, but just know that for elected officials, they don't always value those petitions. Again, unless that they can see it impacts thousands and thousands of people. The same is true for rallies and people getting together at the State House. Yes, it's important to come and be seen at the State House to build those relationships, those personal meetings. All of those are important. But rallies at the State House, again, don't necessarily put forth a lot of value unless it's thousands of people. And so we really have to be choosy. Being there each and every day kind of loses its touch after a while. Make sure you're there when it's meaningful. Again, build those relationships, be there when it matters. Don't give legislators a reason to find a different way into their office or a different way into the State House. We want to build those relationships and make them stronger. We don't want to be an annoyance to the legislators. And again, I know that's hard to hear because it's a public house, right? It's our house that the legislators use to do our business. All of that is true. However, we still want to build relationships in the right way so that legislators come to us for solutions and don't consider us an annoyance and a part of the problem. I want to go back a little bit and talk a bit about what we can expect this session. Again, as we knew, we were getting a new governor. Governor-elect Braun has made it very clear that his top priority is property tax relief for Hoosiers. So we are going to be seeing a lot of conversations around what should property tax relief look like in Indiana. That's going to take a lot of time. As you can imagine, Republicans and Democrats have a different way of viewing property taxes. The House and Senate have a lot of different ideas of how to view property taxes. So that's going to take a lot of energy. We also have heard Governor Braun talk about the workforce itself. He wants to see Hoosiers living their best life and having an opportunity to be in the workforce. So we're going to see a lot of conversations about job creation, which I think is a great thing because I want people with disabilities to be a part of that conversation. We also know that Medicaid itself is going to be a large conversation. Much of it stems from the December 2023 announcement, where a nearly $1 billion shortfall was announced for Medicaid. Um, Medicaid always gets a lot of attention during a budget year. But legislators and especially our fiscal leaders right now are very concerned about Medicaid spending outpacing education. And so whether right or wrong, we are getting a lot of scrutiny around all Medicaid programs. And so I think we need to expect that we're going to get a lot of questions about Medicaid, what it means to people with disabilities, how it's utilized for people with disabilities, looking at eligibility. Are the right people eligible? How are we, really looking at sustainability of Medicaid and Medicaid waivers? And so we have been preparing for this conversation all summer and fall. We have been talking to a lot of legislators already about how Medicaid impacts the lives of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's really going to be important for all of you as people with disabilities and family members to share your story as well. And so again, we will tell you when the time is right for all of that. But we know that we're going to really have a fight on our hands to make sure that Medicaid continues to exist in a very strong way for people with disabilities. And I say that carefully because changes can be made. I'm sure that there are efficiencies in the program that we can make. I just want to make sure that we're making those changes in a very thoughtful way and not making cuts that are going to have unintended consequences down the road. And it's going to be all of us working together to educate our legislators and educate our new leaders in our state agencies about those cuts and again, what those unintended consequences might be. So we know those things are coming up. Specifically, I want to talk about some of the legislative priorities for the Arc of Indiana. We spent an awful lot of time asking for money for the state. So I know that kind of sounds silly, but we are always very involved in talking with legislators during the budget session. Again, about the importance of special education, the importance of Medicaid waivers, vocational rehabilitation services, First Steps, and so many others. And so we are going to legislators asking them to continue their investment in those programs. We always want to draw down as many federal dollars as we possibly can. So we're wanting them to, again, fulfill those fiscal needs for those programs so we can maximize the number of people that are able to utilize those programs and to draw down any federal dollars that we have. We will absolutely be talking about the waiting list. We know that we have more people waiting on Medicaid waiver waiting list than we've had in 20 years. So when I joined the ARC in 1998, we had a waiting list of over 20,000 people, and the wait was about 20 years long, right? That was a pretty horrible time for us. We got that under control to a certain extent, but basically overnight on July 1, we are back to a 20,000 person waiting list, and we need to really think through what does that mean for people. Fortunately, at this time, the wait is not close to 20 years, but it's still a bit too long. People qualify and need services now, and that's the story that we want to make sure that legislators know. We don't want to see people go into nursing facilities or hospitals just because they don't have access to those Medicaid waiver services. So we'll be asking for all of those services as well. For those of you who utilize First Steps right now or have utilized First Steps, you know how important that program is. So we are talking to legislators each and every day about just that return on investment of those early intervention services and how using dollars wisely now is going to pay off as less dollars are needed in special education and perhaps Medicaid waivers down the long run. So we're always talking about those issues. VR employment is a huge priority for people with disabilities and for the ARC of Indiana. We know people want to work. So we want to make sure that people have access to the programs available through VR so that they can not only get some job skills, but they can actually find a path to employment and a career. We also have a couple of other bills this year that we're working on. If any of you paid attention to the 1102 task force or the task force that was chaired by our Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch, the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Task Force, they spent this past summer really looking at the Medicaid buy-in program or the MedWorks program. So this is a program where people can work but buy into Medicaid using a sliding fee premium scale to keep their Medicaid benefits. That program, quite honestly, is very antiquated. It hasn't been changed in 20 years. We want to talk about eliminating the income limit for people because we know that there are far too many people with disabilities who are not going to work, turning down promotions, turning down raises, all because they are living in fear of losing their benefits. That's not what we should be promoting. We want people to work to their full capacity. We want them to work to the level that they want and can work. So trying to get rid of that income limit is really important to us. We also want to raise that asset limit. That asset limit of $2,000 is far too low. It doesn't allow you to save for any type of catastrophic event. So we're proposing that that gets changed to $20,000, which is, I know, not near enough, but we think that that's a viable ask for this legislature. That bill is 1106, House Bill 1106. That's the only one of our bills so far that has been finalized and introduced. So that's unfortunately the only bill that I have a bill number for. That has been given to the Public Health Committee. So that's where it will start out. It is going to have a fiscal component too. So if it passes out of the House Public Health Committee, it'll then move to the House Ways and Means Committee. So we're hopeful that that bill can be heard within the next couple of weeks so that it can kind of start the process of moving through, because again, we know it's going to have to go through another committee. We also know that there's going to be a couple of bills around applied behavior analysis, and this is both on more licensing and certification issues for those who practice ABA services. And then there's also going to be some conversation around some potential limitations put on applied behavior analysis for those who are on Medicaid. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, so we're watching it closely. We have been involved with Representative Becky Cash, who has a very big interest in ABA services. And she is kind of spearheading some of the conversations around what's kind of been floated through Medicaid about some arbitrary limitations and trying to head those off. And so once we see that final language, we'll be able to share that information with you. And again, share a bill number. I do expect that bill to probably be known within the next 3 to 4 days. We also know that she's going to be moving forward, and she being Representative Becky Cash from Zionsville. She's very, very, very passionate about the safety of our students in schools. And so last year she had a bill regarding cameras in classrooms. This very much stemmed from a lot of abuse and neglect and exploitation that was happening in our schools, specifically for students who were receiving special education services. We know that that's a touchy issue, right? There's many families who want to know what's going on in the schools. There's other families who think that it's a breach of privacy. So we're going to work really closely with her to see if there's a fine line there that can be met. What we do know is that Unfortunately, circumstances and incidents have happened that have only been caught because people have gone back and been able to review some of the video footage on these cameras. We know that some things are happening in timeout rooms and sensory rooms and in seclusion areas. We need to make sure that our students have a safe environment that they can go to school and learn alongside their peers. We know that when children come home and they don't want to go to school the next day, they show up with bruises. There's something going on. And specifically for those students who aren't able to verbally communicate, it's a very scary situation. And we need to, again, address that issue in some way to make sure that our students are safe. So we again expect that bill to be introduced and probably should know a bill number within the next few days. We're also working really closely with Representative Ed Clear from New Albany on a Medicaid bill that really reacts to some of the changes that took place in 2024 as that Medicaid shortfall was announced and some provisions were put into place to kind of bring in to alignment some of our cost containment measures. There's going to be a pretty good sized bill that kind of addresses some of these issues. And some of those issues are allowing legally responsible individuals to be paid caregivers. And quite honestly, we know there's a shortage of direct support professionals in Indiana. We do not have enough qualified people who are choosing to work as a DSP in our career path. And families need to have, reliability of who's coming into the home. They need to be able to depend on that person and they need to trust that person. And so we feel strongly that parents, legally responsible individuals should be allowed to be paid caregivers. We also agree that there should be some guardrails on that. And I know that's difficult, but I think we need to create a sustainable program that puts forth some good guardrails, a good path forward so that we can allow families to do this, but also make sure that it doesn't get out of line a little bit and making sure that, again, that there are parameters put in place, reasonable parameters that are put in place to make that happen. We also really want to continue. We know that the state is invested in structured family caregiving, and that is working for a lot of people. And we don't want to make that change at all whatsoever. But what we do want to do is, if this is going to be the option that so many people push families into, then let's make sure it's available at a reasonable rate and reimbursement rate for everybody that could potentially use those services. And so I'm talking specifically around some of our most medically fragile children who were pushed into structured family caregiving, which is currently a program that was not intended, quite honestly, for children, and certainly not medically complex children. And so putting together a fourth tier of structured family caregiving that's a little bit more thoughtful as to who is it working for and what that reimbursement rate for those more specialized services really needs to be thought through. The other thing that we were really talking about is making sure that some things are put in place so that the government, specifically Family and Social Services Administration, the Office of Medicaid Policy and Planning, can't just change things so quickly for families and there not be a lot of lead time to rally and to make those changes be more thoughtful or to kind of change the direction. So we're really wanting to put in statute, which means passing a law that our 150 legislators buy into to make some of these things put in statute so they're not just at the philosophy of a certain person who is the FSSA secretary or our Medicaid director or even our governor, that our 150 legislators who quite honestly are the closest to you, who have relationships with their constituents, who hear from their constituents, get educated by their constituents, hear the stories and the impact of how these programs work for the people that they are elected to represent. We want them to have a say-so in some of these very important things. And so that, again, FSSA can't decide to change the path of some of these programs, that they actually have to get the legislature to buy in and to pass and change potentially some of these laws. We just think that that's a better approach on some of these things. So unfortunately, I don't have bill numbers for some of these things. I haven't seen the exact language that was finalized on some of these things. So I have to talk kind of in generalities right now. But I am anticipating, those three bills that I just talked about to be known over the next week. And I think we have really good legislators who are spearheading those pieces of legislation. We have already started talking with both fiscal leaders, also the people who are going to be heading up our agencies and their new positions, talking about these important issues so that we know they know that they're coming, so that as they get introduced, we can hopefully get the ball rolling pretty quickly to get those issues passed. So I'm going to stop there to kind of see. I know I've talked a lot. Hopefully I've given you guys a good foundation of what we can expect this legislative session and kind of what we're working on. I'm going to look at the questions real fast to see if there's any questions that I can get answered. So, excuse me, I don't know what's going on with my voice this evening. So, Dan Stewart, it's great to see your name and to know that you're out there. I hope you and Mary Jo are doing well. There's a question about, how are we going to deal with the many, many services and supports that people need right now? I think this is again where we have to tell our stories. We have to let legislators know the programs and services people are depending on, the critical help that they are getting from some of these programs, so that legislators know that without those programs, lives are going to be impacted, and talk about how those lives are going to be impacted. We know that those personal stories matter. We have to tell it. And we have to make sure that when legislators start talking about some of these concerns, they don't see it just in numbers and cents. They see it in people. It is always my goal, always, always, always my goal, that when a legislator goes to vote on a bill that impacts the lives of somebody with an intellectual and developmental disability, that as they are voting on that bill, they can picture in their mind a face of somebody in their community that bill is going to impact. So I want to make sure that they not only know a person who is impacted, a family who is impacted, their provider locally who is going to be impacted by this. So I start this process the day after the election. I send every single legislator a congratulatory letter of welcome to the legislature. I'm glad you got elected. I look forward to working with you on the issues that affect people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We've got to start that now, because again, we want them to understand the impact of all of the pieces of legislation that they're going to be looking into. Sorry, I'm kind of trying to read some of these as I go through, and there's a lot of good questions. One of the questions too is about the closing of sheltered workshops and the shift away from that 14C. So that's for people to not be allowed to be paid some minimum wage any longer. This is a big issue. And I think we need to kind of think about the history. That 14C option was put in place decades ago. And those decades ago, the opportunities for people with disabilities was vastly different than what they are today. And what we know is that there are fewer and fewer people leaving high school and wanting to move into a sheltered workshop. We have created so many opportunities for people with disabilities. And quite honestly, we have seen that K through 12 education system want more for people with disabilities by our different diploma options and all of those things. And we know, as we talk to people with disabilities, they want to work, they want to earn a paycheck, and they want greater independence. So whether or not the state of Indiana or even the federal government moves away from 14C, this is something that is dying off anyway, because people are choosing it less and less. We also know that at the same time that we're moving away from 14Cs, we have to create other opportunities. It is not a win for our state if we close sheltered workshops and people just go home and sit. that is not the right approach at all whatsoever. We have to continue to push and create opportunities, which I think a lot of our agencies around the state have done. But more so, we really have to educate our employer network across the state. We have to show them all of the great jobs that people with disabilities can do. We have to share with them the positive impact of hiring people with disabilities. We have to showcase so many people with disabilities who are working in a variety of different jobs. Again, what they are doing, and what they are doing really, really well. There are studies upon studies that are showing so many people with disabilities working specifically in manufacturing, where productivity is really high for those manufacturing settings. The workers' comp rates are lowering because people with disabilities are very good at some of these tasks. And once they learn it really well. They're not always looking for that shortcut. They're not taking a lot of breaks. They're showing up to work. They are thrilled to have a job, and they increase the morale of so many people who work around them. Those are the stories that we have to share. And we have to create those opportunities at the same time as we are, making this shift around the 14 Cs. We cannot let it be a light switch where one day it's available and the next day it's not. That's not an option. We also need to recognize that we have a lot of older people who are working in these sheltered workshops, and we have to be sensitive to that. That's all they've ever known. And maybe they don't want to work outside of that. We have to listen to their choice too. So I think we have to give an array of options for this. But it's an issue that's coming. It's an issue that's on the table. And quite honestly, that the ARC of Indiana supports the state's decision to move away from allowing 14Cs to be paid by Medicaid. That doesn't mean they have to stop existing. It just means they have to be quit being paid by Medicaid. By 2027, because we think that that gives a lot of time for some of these alternatives to come through. Um, So I got to ask a question about, how does the ARC work with other organizations on our advocacy efforts? It takes a village. I can tell you that the State House is a very lonely place, specifically for special education. There is hardly anyone who is actually, there's no one at the State House each and every day who is talking about special education other than the ARC. There are other people who get engaged in education, but they're not necessarily following policy as closely as we are. Now, when we identify something, we know who to reach out to. InSource is a very important collaborator. Indiana Disability Rights, we work very close with them about getting engaged with us on issues as they come, and we're very thankful for those sponsorships, or not for their sponsorships, but for their partnerships. We are always looking at what other groups can we rally around. The ARC of Indiana has a government affairs committee, and on that government affairs committee sits a variety of different advocacy groups. Again, it takes all of us talking to our networks to get legislation passed, and again, to get legislators educated about our issues. And so we work very closely with a lot of different organizations about a variety of issues. And think about it for a second, because the ARC of Indiana, I mean, we talk about the issues that are important to people with intellectual developmental disabilities and their families. That's transportation, that's housing, that's insurance, it's Medicaid, it's Social Security, it's human rights issues, it's voting rights issues, it's civil rights issues, all of those different things. And so it's a very busy area that we focus on. And so there's a lot of different groups that touch those, and we look for those partnerships every single place that we possibly can. And we try to reach out to them to get them engaged, to help us kind of push things through the legislative process. And we're so glad that people do that. The Down Syndrome Indiana group, very, very thankful for their partnership in so many things. So we're glad to see that. There's a question about, again, this ongoing concern we have about our direct support professionals and salary increases, those wage increases. We're not able to pay enough. Wages are determined by our Medicaid waiver rates that are set by the state. We have had a lot of success since 2015, so over the last 9, 10 years, to get those Medicaid waiver rates up. This year, we are fighting really hard to make sure that they're not cut. So we had success in 2017 and 2021 and in 2023 to get those rates increased. Now what we're trying to do is make sure they don't get cut. And we also are educating legislators about every year that we don't increase those Medicaid waiver rates, that means that we're not giving our direct support professionals a cost of living adjustment with their wages. And so that's something that we have to educate them about. We can't stop on that. We also know that to you know, um, recruit and retain people who to work in our field, that it has to be more than a salary. We have tried really hard to professionalize the DSP profession, and we are getting better at that. We passed last year a bill to standardize training, to put forth a registry, because we know far too often a DSP can get let go from one provider because a substantiated incident occurred and then move to another provider, and that history of that person may not be known, and therefore that they can potentially abuse or neglect somebody else. We want that to stop. It's going to take a little bit of time for that to happen, but we know that we've made some great strides in that, and that we're working in the right direction. We've had some great success in our First Steps program over the last few years. They really were able to get a nice increase that was long overdue in 2019. Some good things is really happening in First Steps. We want to make sure their funding does not get cut. And if there is an opportunity for more money to be given to that program, that it goes there. We know how important early intervention services are. And we also know the return on investment, that if you put the money into early intervention services, so many of those kids are able to move out of the program and not need special education services in their K through 12 years, and perhaps may not need as many Medicaid and Medicaid waiver services going on. I had a question about just the availability of special education classes in general. There is a huge shortage of teachers, and specifically special education teachers in our state. And so, yes, I think schools are having to think through how they make special education available to people, and what can they do to make sure that they have the resources that students need. Um, Schools don't get enough funding for special education. They don't get enough funding to pay their teachers as well as they should be. There's going to be a lot of conversation on that this legislative session. In 2023, we were successful in getting more dollars for special education, and some moving around some of those special education categories. That conversation is going to continue to be really important, and it's going to be a really big conversation. Legislators really are focused on education. They're not necessarily focused particularly on public education. Our school voucher programs, the education scholarship accounts, that is a big issue for our legislature. We live in a state, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the way you look at it, that believes in school choice. I believe in school choice too, because quite honestly, so many of our public schools aren't doing what's right by so many of our students. So I think families do need to have a choice of where their student is educated. What we do need to make sure is that all of those programs are accessible and easy to navigate for so many of our families. So I got asked if I think that there will be big changes for our families based on the new legislators elected, and will that be good or bad? I think that remains to be seen. I I'm hopeful, quite honestly. I think we have really good relationships with our legislators. The new group of legislators that are coming in are responding really well to our outreach about learning more about Medicaid and understanding the impact of some of the conversations taking place. I think, again, we need to embrace those who are working within the Braun administration to make sure that, again, they understand the programs that they are overseeing. They understand the impact of any major changes and any cuts. And again, I think as we use, some of their platforms and some of the things that they are putting out there as their priorities. Again, workforce. If workforce is a priority, that's really important to people with disabilities. We want to work too, and we want to work to our full capability. And so some of these asset and income limitations really do make us underemployed and not seeking employment because of our concern about this benefit cliff. We need to educate legislators about that and tell them that we can be an answer to helping them build our workforce and to help, some of these industries that are in a workforce crisis. People with disabilities can help them solve all of those problems. I think that, we do have to keep in mind we have a conservative legislature, but again, we have to make sure that they understand Medicaid, right? There is not just one Medicaid program, there's over 30 Medicaid programs. So let's educate them about those various Medicaid programs and educate them really, really well about the Medicaid program that specifically impacts people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and talk about what those changes and cuts might do and the harm that might be had. That's where we really need to focus our attention. So I don't think it's going to be good or bad. I think, again, we have a reason to be hopeful. And I think if we all come together and try really hard to educate our legislators, build those personal relationships, we'll have some success. Um, so this is a really good question, and this is from Reagan. And Reagan, I keep typing at me if I don't hit your question on target. So her question is talking about when to contact legislators at the federal level and at the state level, and kind of, the issues that go to CMS and all of that kind of stuff. So this is really hard. So when Family and Social Service Administration puts out public comments for like the changes in the state plan and in our waivers, that is the stuff that is federally impacted, right? So that is the stuff that CMS, who is the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services, that is a federal department, and they are the ones who approve Indiana's state plan for Medicaid and the things that are on, I'll just stop there, our Medicaid, our Medicaid state plan. So whenever those public comments are in, that you need to put those out there because you are educating our our policymakers, our kind of our agency people on what your thoughts are about the programs. When you contact legislators, our state legislators, those are the programs that the state has control of. So again, we can direct our legislators to direct FSSA to amend the state plan to do XYZ, to create a program about this. We can do that. But sometimes the state legislators will say, well, that's really up to the agency as they work with the federal agencies. Sometimes the agency, rarely, will say, go to the legislature because that's really a legislative issue. We do need to know the issues. Social Security, federal issue, right? Our state legislators do not have control about Social Security. That you have to write your U.S. congressman and your U.S. senator. Again, you can get information about who that is on our website, on our public policy page. Our state legislators are our state programs. So again, our state Medicaid, our Medicaid waivers, how we deal with some of our transportation issues, housing issues, employment issues, all of that stuff is at the state level. It's also then important for you to know what's not at the state level, but at the local level, right? Some of those city ordinances, those zoning things, that is all your local, like your mayor, your city council members, and your commission members. You really do have to understand that there's three branches of government, local, state, and federal. You have to know those issues. I am happy to have a one-on-one with anybody who wants to understand that. I kind of get geeked out a little bit of all that, so I welcome that opportunity to kind of talk through some of those issues. Somebody asked about what happens if the Department of Education at the federal level gets shut down. Uh, that is not a pretty situation at all whatsoever. So we would be giving up, the state of Indiana would be giving up a lot of dollars. A lot of the federal protections could potentially go away for our students, and that would not be a good situation. So that would give the state of Indiana the authority to determine who gets educated, how they gets educated, and the money that goes with it. And that could get really ugly for us. And so it is a real threat that could happen. We are very fortunate to have a very good and strong team at the Arc of the United States who is working on those issues, keeping us all up to date and fighting to make sure that our services, both in Medicaid and education, stay intact. Um, Somebody asked about, how do we get those talking points? So I can give you all talking points to write some of those letters. One, if you specifically want to reach out to me, send me an email and say, I'm getting ready to write my legislator. What should I say? I am glad to help you craft those talking points for you. But again, as those bills come up for hearings in the committee, in our memos every week, we will say, tell your legislator to support House Bill 1001. Talk about how that issue is going to impact your family. If is hard data that we can share, we will absolutely give that out to you. So again, that return on investment on First Step services, we'll weave some of that information into our memo and kind of bullet it out for you so you can take those bullets, add some of your own story and put it into your own words and put that into your letter. But if you ever have a question, please don't hesitate to send me an email, and us on our team will be glad to get back to you on that. Um, Trying to think if there's anything else here. Somebody asked, again, if, if education gets down federally, will the state cover those costs? Probably not, not to the tune that the federal government gives us. Again, I think that's the hard thing, right? The state will then be in control of how much money goes to each program. And we'll then have to decide how those programs are run. And I think that we would absolutely see a reduction, not only in the money available, but also in the number of people who are available to utilize those programs as well. People have asked what my email is. So my email is kdodson@arcind.org. So again, that is kdodson@arcind.org. If you didn't get that, feel free to go onto our website. There is a contact us link. I am on there. Click that to email me, and your email will be sent to me. I don't know if I missed anything up there. So Carly, weigh in if you saw something that I needed to address. I know we're at 7 o'clock, so that was good timing. I think I got through most of those questions.
I think you did too, Kim. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. I know that there are a lot of questions and that and that there's a lot of concern and a lot of, just uncertainty out there right now about what to expect, both at the state level and at the federal level. And so making sure that you're staying up to date, making sure you know what's going on, making sure that you have reliable sources that you can go to for information is incredibly important. And so, one of the things that you can take for granted is that you will always get accurate and up-to-date information from the Arc of Indiana and the Arc of the United States. That doesn't mean information won't change between the time we give it and the time you may read it. But you can always get information. You can always call and ask us about what's going on, and you always have a partner to know what's going on, to be able to figure out how to proceed next. Know that you are never alone in any of this. We are always here at the ARC to help you through all of those things, whether it's something like public policy, like the state legislature, like public comments on proposed changes to waiver services, but also, in your personal life, when, if you are running into some issues with, your specific Medicaid situation, or if you are trying to figure out, hey, what options are available for my loved one because school is going to be ending, in a couple of years. We need to start preparing for life after school. You always have people here at the ARC that you can talk those specific things through with. And so I want to make sure you know that you are never alone in any of this. We also will be continuing our Ask the ARC series. So if you ever have ideas or if there are ever any topics you want covered, by all means, let us know and we can develop those. You can also see all of our former Ask the ARCs on our YouTube channel or through the ARC Academy, so that you can learn when you have time. When it's 11 o'clock at night and the kids are finally in bed and you've got the time to actually do it, we've got those resources available. And so we want to thank you for joining us tonight. If you guys know, if you are anything like me, you're going to think of a new question like 3 days from now. Give us a call, send us an email, and talk with us about it then too. You are always welcome to reach out to us. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Kim, is there anything else you want to add tonight?
No, again, please reach out. Now is the time to start those introduction letters to legislators to start building those relationships. So reach out if you need any help.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.